Hello, and welcome to another episode of Breadcast Gaming Talk. Back when I had my original Nintendo DS Lite, one of the games I remember buying was this game called The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. Now, at this point, I was not aware of this famous series from Nintendo. I also remember that I never finished the game back when I first had it, and I basically gave up on it and just ended up trading it into GameStop. Also, this was back when I was in middle school or so. This also really put a great disdain for the Legend of Zelda games, and that kind of has not changed for a long time for me. However, I recently have been kind of turned back on to this series, and since I had used a Nintendo DS emulator to play Transformers Prime the game, I thought I would take the opportunity to revisit Phantom Hourglass. I made myself the stipulation that I was not going to allow myself to give up, no matter how much frustration there was, because one of the other things that turned me off from this series is the amount of puzzles and how terrible I am at them and how much they just angered me. I knew that things could be different this time, and I am also not afraid to admit that I used to walk through to help myself through this game, and it really was a big help, because otherwise I wouldn't have actually gotten through it. Now, for the last thing, I've been one to do my discussion videos before I finish a game, and sometimes, like in the case of Call of Duty World War II, it bites me in the ass where I need to make a second video. What I'm saying is that I waited until I finished the game before I recorded this video and turned it into a video. So, with that long ass introduction out of the way, I am going to be talking about The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. I would have put this in the intro, but I need everyone to realize that this is a discussion and not a review. Therefore, I'm not talking about everything in depth. I'm only talking about things I personally like or dislike. This is also my first Legend of Zelda game, and the first one that I fully finished, like from start to finish. And so there will be moments of me saying, apparently this is a thing in these kinds of games. So, if you're used to playing the games in this series, bear with me. This game is the one that comes after Wind Waker, which as of now, I have not played, but I will fix that at some point. This game released on June 23rd, 2007 for the Nintendo DS. I thought this might have been a launch title for the Nintendo DS Lite, but that system released more than a year after Phantom Hourglass did. And I thought this because of how you use the touchscreen to move Link and do a lot of other things in this game. Also, the moments that you have to shout into the microphone, or the moment you have to reveal the location of the Temple of Courage on the map by closing the system lid to transfer from one map to your map. I don't know. For some reason, a game that takes advantage of the system it's on just feels like a launch title to me. But, since I mentioned it, let's talk about the things that can be moved with the touchscreen. As I said, you do all the movement of Link with the touchscreen. You also do the boomerang, the bomb choose, the bow and arrow, the shovel. Need I go on? By the way, you actually have the option to name the character. And I mean, what other name would you give this character besides Link? I really don't get why they do that, but whatever. To be honest, I was dumb and I didn't call him Link, but that was my mistake. Don't be like me and do the same thing I did. Remember how I said I used the walkthrough to get through this game? Well, I'm bringing that up because there were several points in the walkthrough that it would say something is optional. And like, perhaps for people who are used to Legend of Zelda games and want a challenge, yes, it can be optional. However, if you're like me, this definitely isn't optional. One of the frustrating parts of the game is called the Temple of the Ocean King. This temple is very essential to the game for many reasons. It's the temple you go to 6 times. Now, it wouldn't be as frustrating if the puzzles that you solve as you go would stay solved for when you do have to come back, but no, they don't. What also doesn't help is the mechanics of the temple. Things start pretty easy because the first time you go there, you're just dealing with the life draining mechanic, which doesn't really matter because you're not going that far to get the Phantom Hourglass because it's the first thing you get there. Like I said above, each time you go back, you have to do the same puzzles over and over, but it's supposed to be easier because you can unlock shortcuts that are used with the items you gain throughout the rest of the game. After the first time, the hourglass is what stops the life drain from happening, but only while there's still time in it. Once it stops, the life drain mechanic takes over, and frankly, it takes over pretty quickly. By the fourth return, you get the midway point in the temple, which is like floor 6. This works by taking the best time it takes you to get to that midway point, and then you can use the teleporter thing to go outside the temple, and you can return to the midway point minus whatever time it took you to get there the normal way. So like, if it takes you 2 minutes to get from floor 1 to the midway point at floor 6, then if you were to travel there from the teleport thing outside the temple to the one inside the midway point, it would just knock off 2 minutes and start you there. Not only does the puzzle aspect of the temple get harder, but the phantom enemies get upgraded each time you have to return there, and you usually only have to return there when you need another portion of the sea chart. And speaking of phantoms, one thing that kind of irks me, and this is probably done on purpose and is a staple of the series and blah blah blah, but like, one of the last things you get in the game is called the Phantom Sword, and it's mostly for defeating the big enemy Bellum, but you know what you can do with it? Kill phantoms! Do you know how much easier that would have made life in the Temple of the Ocean King if you could get that fucking sword in the beginning of the game? Anyways, speaking of sea charts, it is kind of neat traveling by boat to places in the beginning of the game. Yeah, there are various enemy monsters and ships, but like later in the game you run into this woman who has it out for the captain of your ship Linebeck. So there's a random chance that while you're sailing you're gonna run into her. She'll attack you with her ship and then board your ship, and you'll have to sword fight her while Linebeck hides in a crate. The encounter was interesting the first time, but after that, it just becomes annoying. Sure, Linebeck will reward you the first few times, but he eventually stops doing that. Like I said, it all just becomes annoying. Travel gets way easier and quicker when you get the Cyclone Slate. There are golden frogs in this sea that will give you a specific sign you can draw on the slate, and a cyclone will whisk your ship away to that golden frog's location. This also makes it easier to avoid Pirate Woman all the way around. To be fair, it is nice traveling by boat, but I kinda wish there were things not trying to sink your ship all the time. The sharks are the worst because they're so hard to kill. At least for me, I ended up with a sunken ship more often than I could kill the sharks. When it comes to the other temples, apart from the Ocean King one, they are so much easier than the Ocean King temple, but they're still challenging in their own way. Typically, there's an item you'll get just before that temple or while inside the temple. You'll use it heavily throughout. Then you will have to use it to take down the boss of the temple. For example, the Goron Temple is where you get the Bomb Chew, and when you fight the boss, you have to send those into its mouth 3 times in the first part of the boss fight. It just seems to be how things go in temples in these games. I was relieved that the game didn't have a water temple, as I was told ahead of time that water temples are always the hardest. Phantom Hourglass has a fire temple, Goron Temple, ice temple, Temple of Courage, Temple of Wind, and Muto's Temple. One of the mini-game sort of things is Sunken Treasure. You can pull from the bottom of the ocean, and more often than not, you get ship parts. It's not like I don't like that one can customize their ship, but only a handful of these parts are actually useful, and those are the ones that give you more ship health, but you don't really need that to get through the game. Now, the fairies was an interesting idea too. You have the Fairies of Wisdom, Power, and Courage that you get from the first 3 temples of the game. As you play, you will find and sometimes have to buy power gems or gems of power, gems of wisdom, or gems of courage. There are only 20 of each in the game, and I would say that you really only need to find 10 of them. You can go to Spirit Island and upgrade your spirit fairies with the gems. The power one will give you a flame sword that does more damage. The wisdom one will make you take less damage, and the courage one gives you like a ranged attack with the sword. There are, like I said, there's 20 of them, so you can upgrade the spirits twice. At this point, I want to talk about parts of the game where I struggled the most, which is really only 2 points. Obviously, the Temple of the Ocean King is something that I did struggle with. The idea that you have to sneak past phantoms and get through things in a timely manner before you get the life sucked out of you was a bit stressful for me. Through the power of the walkthrough, I learned that the best way to get a better time is you have to get as many of the golden pots that spawn extra time. Not only that, but you can get 2 sands of hours as Sunken Treasure, and I would say you kind of have to get those because otherwise you're going to have a frustrating time. The other thing that really frustrated me with both fights with Bellum, the big bad guy. The aspect of it is that when Celia gets the ability to give you phantom spears that allow you to stop time, the way you stop time is you have to draw an hourglass symbol, and that was the most frustrating thing to do because it only worked 30% of the time. You stop time so you can hit Bellum. It seems simple, but even in the second fight, when you have the same aspect too, and you have to stop time by drawing a frickin' hourglass symbol, it's even harder because you have to time it just right so that Bellum's weak spot is open. And so you have to stop time when that's open and so you can hit it. And it just made the failing to draw an hourglass symbol even more frustrating. Like, I understand why they want to do a touchscreen thing related to that, but like, I feel like it could have been executed a little better and been way less frustrating. This is really hard for me to say whether or not I like the game. There's so many ups and downs between having fun and being really frustrated. But given how I was never able to beat the game back when I first had it, and now I have finished it, it does feel good to finally accomplish this. Is it a good game? Is it a bad game? Well, okay, it's not a bad game at all, but it's definitely one of the better Nintendo DS games in the library. It takes full advantage of the capabilities of the hardware, and yeah, I like this game. I like it, and so I'm glad that I finished it finally after all these years. Therefore, The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass is a good game and can be enjoyable at times in my experience. That's all I have to say, so if you want another conversation, leave a comment below. As always, thanks for listening, and goodbye.